everyone, and welcome to all of you. I am so incredibly delighted to be here with everyone today and in community with those on the video, the panelists that have joined here today, and with all of you. So really, thank you for joining us. And so for those of you that I haven't met, I'm the founder and CEO of CoImpact, and I am in conversation today with three amazing leaders.
Hi, Olivia. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm very excited about today's launch. I'm Laura Garcia. I'm Mexican. I used to be the executive director of Fondo Semillas, a feminist fund, and now I'm based in Colorado, United States, and I lead Global Greengrants Fund, which is an organization that mobilizes resources to support grassroots environmental justice movements.
Hi, everyone. Really excited to be here among such amazing women. I'm really excited about the fund. My name is Crystal. I'm based in Nairobi, Kenya. I identify as a Pan-African feminist. I work on macro-level economic justice, changing and disrupting narrative systems, policies. That's me.
My name is Sohini, and I work with an organization called Breakthrough that has been working to transform gender norms to make violence against women and girls unacceptable for the past 2 decades. I've spent about 30 plus years in this sector and have always been passionate about gender equality and working with women and girls. So really excited about the Gender Fund, and we'll talk a lot more about it, I'm sure.
What I'm hoping for this, and what we discussed as well amongst the four of us, is that hopefully this feels a bit like we're at a table all together. The four of us, as well as with all of you as well in the chat, which I guess would be a large table, but really so that it feels like it's a conversation in as much as we can in this virtual life that we're in. We all know well, it really is all about community, and it's about how we come together to be able to see the change that we want to see. And so feeling this kind of community, I'm so excited about this discussion today. Before we do that, I would just add a little bit of context, because we are launching the Gender Fund today and wanted to give a little bit more context about it for those that may not be as familiar. So as you heard in the opening video, really the goal of this fund is to support partners that are working to make systems more just and more inclusive. It's about advancing women's power and agency and leadership across all levels. Also, as so many of you have shared with us, and as we've all discussed, the how really matters. So it's also about, our focus is on supporting our program partners and our program partners' vision, of whom are here with us, I can see in the chat. And so it's really all about us being of supporting those that are really leading this work and that are rooted in the communities where they're working, and doing so with large and flexible grants over the long term. The topic for today's session is galvanizing collective action for gender equality. To the panelists, I would love to ask you, when you think about gender equality, what does that mean to you?
Can I take a step back a bit and talk a bit about gender equity that lies at the core of gender equality, and also at the core of Breakthrough's thinking? And that's the process of fairness, being fair to women, girls, and gender minorities, everybody who has been, historically and socially marginalized. And so that fairness has to include strategies and measures that should be available to compensate for that historical and social marginalization. It means that all of us enjoy the same status in a society, regardless of their genders, and enjoy the same entitlements to all human rights, enjoy the same level of respect in the community, and can take advantage of the same opportunities. But a lot of it is actually the ability to share power, power to shape the outcomes of the choices that we make in lives, and everybody must have an equal share of that. So eventually, gender equality will ensure that everyone actually is reaching their full potential.
So I'm joining you from Nairobi, where we're supporting Femnet to convene the first ever convening on the continent on the CSW theme. And so I asked a few feminists that were here what they thought gender equality means to them. And I got this from Brooke Williams, and she had this to say, which really speaks the words right out of my soul, and I quote, Gender equality is now a phrase that is used to placate women and girls and essentialize girlhood and womanhood, a breed language that is used to pretend that the structure that upholds our current realities, such as racism, capitalism, white imperialism, are not still killing us, a term to distract us from the fact that building power for women, girls, and gender-expansive persons in countries that hold up the world is constantly being co-opted and weaponized against us. As Toni Morrison said about racism, the term is being used to keep us doing the work, keep us explaining over and over again the reason for our being over again. So I not only rely on gender equality, I rely on feminism that recognizes the political and the need for ideology. And I 100% agree with that.
I also agree 100% on what Crystal was just mentioning, and Sohini too. For me, gender equality is not just the ability to have equal opportunities between men and women, but to actually be able to change entire economic, political, social, and cultural systems. And this is why, in my view, feminism is the most important emancipatory movement that we have, especially intersectional feminisms. And one of feminism's biggest gifts for me personally in my life, but I also think for society, is that it gives us the opportunities to imagine different and better futures. With feminism, we empower our dreams with endless possibilities by reminding us that all oppressions are human inventions that can be overturned, and no matter how deeply ingrained they are, at the root of all of our social problems and society. And one thing that I have been tackling in the last in this last few years is the false appreciation that gender equality only includes girls and women, and that it's only an issue of women. It's actually at the foundation of renovating all of our systems towards justice and equality for all.
I would love to ask you how you think about this question of scale, and how do you make sure to sort of balance between when you think about scale, but then you also think about each individual, right? So, and how to think about that also from the grassroots through to systems, and how to consider that. So I'd love to get perspectives from you. I'll start with Laura.
What does it mean to scale? I think that something that systems theory can teach us is that scaling really requires and depends on a complex web of interrelations. There are many actions that occur kind of under the water. Revolutions are not spontaneous. They are the result of living systems of collaboration and continuous relationship and connected actions and change of behaviors. And all of that is required to scale effectively. In fact, what we're learning from social movements is that the best alternatives to the systems are already happening in the grassroots level. So how do we scale up that grassroots spontaneity and vision and organizing? We need to look at intersectionality and the interdependence of rights. So the biggest issues we know that don't exist independently of other social problems. So to scale is also important to look at how different rights are interdependent. We cannot have climate justice without racial justice. We cannot have gender equality without economic equality. And also that we cannot tackle, for example, gender-based violence without addressing forced marriage or lack of education or women's land rights. So to scale, we need to look at interdependence and at intersectionality. If we want to expand, we need to first go deep.
What we understand by scale is something that has come down to us from a capitalistic system of economy. When we look at an innovation and think about how that can reach 100,000, then a 10 million, then 100 million, we have this incremental way of looking at things. And then, the social sector becomes obsessed with, just as Laura said, entrepreneurship and innovation. Everyone's excited about starting something new rather than scaling what has already been proven to work. There are so many examples of that. And so, as a result, a lot of funding goes to exciting new innovations in terms of products and services. And somehow no one wants to work on things that actually has proven to be working. So I see three things which are very, very important in this. The need to work together with your, co-workers in other civil society organizations. Second is that I feel the government is an essential part of that. And when you are working on gender equality, like somebody said in the chat, you're not working on cute little things. You're actually making political statements. You're upsetting the political apple cart. Lastly, where is the support for this kind of work? Moving deep-rooted norms takes time, but if you are successful, you have changed something totally essentially. You need patience to see the impact. This is not going to happen overnight. You need, multi-year core flexible funding that actually will help you to get in all those things that you need to change that system. There are very few organizations supporting this kind of work. So, harmonizing funding from a group of people who really believe in this, like the Gender Fund is doing, is fantastic, and it will give the kind of capital which is needed for at-scale systems change work on gender equality.
Crystal, what I want to ask you is, as you think about specifically in the economics space, what do you think is needed in order to have, basically to change institutions so that we can have more women leaders in this space? And also beyond that, we speak to your perspectives as well as to what's needed then both getting into the spaces and then also beyond that as well.
So I'll speak from where I sit, which is I'm a Pan-African feminist and I work on issues regarding the continent of Africa. And so those are multiple fights, right? It's a Pan-African fight against neoliberalism, yes, and neocolonialism. It's a feminist fight against the patriarchy, and then put together, it's this monster of a fight. Not only should we ensure more women in leadership, we have more women in leadership, but what sort of ideology are these women holding in their positions of leadership? Feminist economists thought and scholarship matter. It is this that is going to begin to shift the cogs of power, to put a lens of power as a point of analysis, to begin to look at the world a little differently. And as you said, or as Sohini said, the people that are most left behind, how can we center them as we progress? And so this means an understanding of our relation with the economy, where we sit, and our region's relations with the global economy. We must then analyze all of this in our own voices. We must also look to alternatives defined by us, rooted in our realities. And that work is hard and has to be done collectively and intersectionally. And so when Sohini talks about, scale and building this movement, it has to be done at scale, right? And so as Sohini says, the feminist movements must be funded. They must be funded with core funding, flexible funding that allows them to dream. And the work of dreaming, and as I said today here in Nairobi, is political. Radical thought, radical imagination is at the heart of pushing for change. And this dreaming, this imagination is really what we must fund. So we have leaders who are pushing this agenda.
Let me actually go to you next, Sohini. What needs to happen in order for there to be more, whether it's the administrators or the trainers or the curriculum developers, the principals, what do you think needs to happen in order for things to fundamentally shift, for there to be more leaders throughout the whole system?
When we talk about creating a gender transformative education system, gender is not a priority in the way, and at least I'm talking about India here mostly, gender is not a priority in the way the whole education reform is going. So it's for us to actually co-create the roadmap along with the government to see what can be actually beneficial. So a whole lot of work is around the pedagogy, not just only for the adolescents in the classroom, but also for the teachers. In India, if you must remember, a large of the workforce of teachers are women, and in a way it has to appeal to them. Why are we talking about gender in your, in your life, in your classroom? It has to appeal to them to be able to actually make a change in the whole teacher training curriculum and bring in gender into that. Secondly, the curriculum, though, the curriculum has changed a lot, but yet the curriculum is very gendered. We still put emphasis on women's places domestic, men's places outside, but most importantly, people who are in charge of the systems, who actually pushes, teachers or do not push them. The whole administrative department needs to actually start looking at it as something which is important. So if we kind of put a focus on gender transformative education and keep on showing the results and keep on showing a mirror to the government saying, this is what happens if you make the education system more gender transformative, people in 10 years time probably will sit up and take notice. But in the meantime, we would have created much more equitable classrooms, much more equitable, responsive classrooms, and we would have bred a group of adolescents, a whole generation of adolescents who have come out with much more gender progressive views than the earlier generation. So that's, in a nutshell, is the idea that we are working on.
So Laura, I wanted to ask you about, and you mentioned this earlier, the role of philanthropy. Tell us, what do you think when you think about sort of, if you could dream what philanthropy actually would look like, be like, do, what would that be to be most effective?
I think that we need to just first remember that while funding for gender equality has been rising over the last decade, we are still facing very serious, worrisome numbers here. Only 1% of funding has reached women's organizations. Philanthropy, in many ways, what I mostly criticize about it is that it mirrors the structures of inequality in a very clear way, and that's what I hope that that we can continue to change. Something that is significant is that the Gender Fund, for example, is committed to bringing resources into this grossly underfunded space and to address gender systems and not just projects. Something that's important for us is to pay attention that quantity in funding is less important than flexibility, trust, long-term funding, the accompaniment of and sharing power, like my colleagues were saying. So all of those things are probably the biggest challenges in philanthropy right now, but I'm excited that this organization, Co-Impact, for example, is bringing philanthropists and private sector partners and funders that were usually not as clear on paying attention to the systemic change that's needed for gender equality, and bringing it together in what I hope can become a culture, a feminist culture of philanthropy, and democratizing resources in an anti-colonialist way in the global South.
If we are sitting here 10 years from now, what's our call to action in terms of sort of what do we need to see in 10 years from now, and to be able to be looking back and say what really is that vision? I'd love to hear from each of you.
If the Gender Fund really takes off and does all that it was supposed to do, we would see a sea change in that. We would see ideas that would go to scale in a much more enabling way, in a way that would involve lots more organizations, lots more communities in that process of growth. And it would also, create a group of feminist leaders, leaders of these changes, and in a transformative vision of a just world, which is free from, poverty, oppression, patriarchy, requires transformative feminist leaders who enable others to lead and build power within them instead of over them. And I'm very passionate about this. And so two things always bother me is that one is dismantling bias within the leadership area. So we recognize that society gives us certain advantages that we have not asked for or earned, based on gender, class, race, caste, ability, sexual orientation, everything, education. How can we help and uncover and challenge these forms of discrimination through our way, not only in the community where we are working, but within the organizations where we are working, and that the ultimate test of that kind of a leadership is the spaces we create for others to lead. So the Gender Fund can actually help bring this kind of leadership out in the front. And I wish it all the luck for doing that.
I think that one thing that I dream of is that if we are able to really decolonize our thinking, we could potentially imagine, therefore, that philanthropy doesn't exist in the way it is or cease to exist because we will not need it, but rather that we construct a community that is not only fighting injustice and crisis, but building happiness, love, imagination that are very much at the center of feminist thinking. I imagine a path in these next 10 years where we're not only focused in fighting the injustices and keeping up with the poly-crisis world that we live in, but that we also dance as feminists and that we also have fun and pay attention to care, because that's actually political and that's actually the key to transformation. So hopefully philanthropy can also pay attention to that and can start resembling the change that it wants to create outside, but also within.
I'm exhausted with this performance of busyness that the current funding landscape puts on women's rights and feminist organizations. We're writing reports and writing proposals for little bits of money over and over and over again. And in a way, it's sort of almost keeping us from doing the thinking and the imagination. I'm hoping that in the next 10 years, this fund is the leader and is showing the way for other funds to allow and to open up space, actually not even allow, to open up space for women's rights and feminist organizations to do that radical imagining, to do the work that they know needs to be done on their terms in the way that they want to do it. And I'll read a little bit from a piece that Agizit wrote, and she says, I contributed to this. I hope the Gender Fund contributes to a world where we measure happiness, wellness, leisure, love, safety, shelter, education, freedom, beauty, measure the health of the people, the soil, the waters, and the air, measure life. All of these are signs of wealth, indicators of an economy of abundance for all people, where all gains are shared and all people are cared for, where it is clear that there is enough for the living to live. And in this place, the harvest must always be mutual. And that's the world that I hope that Gender Fund will contribute to. And I'm pretty sure that it will, with the team that is behind it, with the thinking and the care of duty held with this project, with this fund. I think we're going to be a huge contributor to that dream.